Okay, I guess we'll get started. Welcome to today's talk about Milchmet Mitzvah. And does everybody hear me? Somebody just acknowledge. Okay, great. So it used to be in the old days that you would just get up in the classroom and you would talk. Today we have to do it all this high tech. We're on Zoom, and today's class will involve a lot of sharing. I want to show you text. I want to show you video, audio. So I'm going to try to do it as seamlessly as possible, but I apologize if there might be some interruptions, some breaks as I try to do share and unshare. So just a quick introduction to the topic. As everybody here knows, Israel has now been engaged in a war, a 2-front, 3-front, 4-front war already that's been going on for over a year. It's the longest war that the state of Israel has known. It's been a very costly war in terms of lives, injuries, and society, what it's done to society, economically and socially. And in Judaism, we have, for all things that take place in life, we have halachas that help us get through them, halachas that define how we act in certain situations. And regarding war as well, there are halachot about war. But in order to implement those halachas, one needs to categorize the type of war that's taking place. And the basic question we're going to start with today is this a Milchmet Mitzvah, an obligatory war? And again, that's a title, that's a name, that's a definition that we give within the Halakhic system to a type of war. And with it, it carries lots of ramifications. And maybe we'll mention a few of them. But it's a very serious topic, because how we define war defines what we have to do during that war, who participates, what leniencies might apply during the war. So, and it's a topic with a lot of serious ramifications, and yet a topic that there are very, very few sources going back over the last 2,000 years, because the idea of an independent Jewish state in the land of Israel engaged in war wasn't something that existed for the last 2,000 years. So there aren't a lot of sources in the interim period. And now there are sources. There are sources we're going to be talking about. There's no source sheet. Rather, the sources, as they come up, as I mentioned, they're going to be video, there's going to be audio, and there's going to be text. I will hopefully be sharing as we go along. And as I said, there are a lot of ramifications. One of them may be who has to go to war. Can there be an exemption for yeshiva students? Can there be an exemption for Haredim, however we define that? That's not what I'm going to talk about. There are other sources that deal with that as well, meaning these sources we're going to talk about today are relevant to that conversation, or I could say to that controversy, but that's not going to be the principal topic today. There are ramifications regarding kashrut, regarding what the soldiers can eat or cannot eat, regarding risk-taking, regarding things that may seem as mundane as laws regarding toilets while in the military camp. But this issue today is going to be how to define the law, the war. Is it a Milchmet Mitzvah or something else? Now, how did I get into this? I don't usually talk about this type of topics. What got me started thinking about it, let's see how we could do this. We'll start with this. Was an article that was in Mishpacha magazine. This is the front page of the article that appeared, I would say about, does everybody see my screen? Sorry. Does everybody see the screen? You can see the Mishpacha? Okay.
Can you make it downloadable for us?
I'm sorry?
Can you make it downloadable for us?
We only see your list. It didn't open.
You only see the list. Okay. Sorry.
If you do share and touch on your screen, you'll be able to open it and we'll be able to see it.
Right over here, this, and then here. Now, do you see it?
Yeah.
Do you see now this picture of a rabbi there with text underneath?
Too small.
Can you make it downloadable for us?
No.
I have no idea how.
Okay.
Okay, hold on. Do you see now the picture? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, this was the front page of an article that appeared in Mishpacha magazine. As you could read, it starts off, it discusses the Haredi draft issue, a controversial issue. It was an article written by Gedalia Gutenberg, but it was an interview with Rabbi Yitzchak Berkowitz. Rabbi Yitzchak Berkowitz is Rosh Yeshiva of Eish Torah, well known in the Israeli-American Haredi world. He has his own kollel. I don't know him personally, but he has a reputation of a Talmid Chacham and as a Rosh Yeshiva and a leader of American Israeli Haredi community. In the middle of this article, do you still see now the text? You now see another text. So in the Torah World Hashkafis, yes. So this is the question in red. It was an interview of Rabbi Berkowitz. So in the Torah World Hashkafa, Torah World meaning Haredi, why is what's going on here not indeed a Milchmet Mitzvah? And Rabbi Berkowitz answered, Rav Moshe Feinstein was asked by one of the Rabbanim of Kfar Chabad years ago whether Israel's wars fall under that category. He has a tshuva in which he writes that to meet the definition of a Milchmet Mitzvah, you need a Jewish king, you need the V'tumim, etc. This is the whole answer. This is what he gave, these two paragraphs for this question. I read this and I was intrigued. Not being an expert in Rav Moshe Feinstein's tshuvas and all of the Igros Moshe, I've read some of them and I was intrigued because I was surprised that Rav Moshe Feinstein had written about this topic, and I was further surprised he would have said such a thing, which seems to be contrary to the Rambam. So I said, you know what? I'm interested a little to follow up. And I looked up the Igros Moshe, and the Igros Moshe wasn't exactly the way Rabbi Berkowitz presented it. And that's an understatement. So that was the first impetus. Once I realized that, the second impetus I had was a warm memory I have of a 2-tape series that was made by Rabbi Shalom Gold. Rabbi Shalom Gold, it's too bad that Rabbi Kalman left. Rabbi Shalom Gold was a rabbi for many years in Toronto. He was then a rabbi in West Hempstead. And then he put his money where his mouth was. He was a very outspoken religious Zionist. He made Aliyah mid-career, was a rabbi in Har Nof in Yerushalayim, as well as a regular teacher in the OU Center in Yerushalayim. And Rabbi Gold, 15 or 20 years ago, came across a 2-part series, or actually he made a 2-part, came across a lecture by Rabbi Berkowitz. Rabbi Berkowitz, the same Rabbi Berkowitz, had given a lecture about religious Zionism. And Rabbi Gold was, shall we say, livid by what he heard. And let's see if I could just play you the first few seconds. Hold on 1 second. Again, share. We have to. It should be saying we go share sound. And okay.
I promise you, I've listened to the tapes and can understand why you were so confused and disturbed. There is much that I have to say about the lectures, and since I don't want to be accused of any misunderstanding or taking words out of context, I will tape some of the sections I wish to deal with and then respond. As a general statement at the outset, let me make it clear that I know Rabbi Berkowitz only by reputation as a fine scholar, Talmid Chacham, and a defender of halacha. Unfortunately, I know him also from these tapes, and they present a completely different person. The tapes are replete with inaccuracies and falsehoods that I hope are the result of ignorance and that beg for a response. Differences of opinion are valid and legitimate. In fact, they are the stuff of which halacha is made. The honest give and take that sees as its objective the search for truth is the hallmark, the beauty, and the guarantee of a dynamic living halacha.
And what Rabbi Gold does is he goes on in these tapes and he gives little snippets from Rabbi Berkowitz, and then he responds to them. I want to give you one example from Rabbi Gold, and then the way I'm going to structure our shir today is after I read what Rabbi Berkowitz said in Mishpacha magazine, I discovered that Rabbi Berkowitz had a shir that he gave in January, meaning well into the war. The war started October 7th. Rabbi Berkowitz gave a shir about this very topic. And what I'm going to do is give little snippets from his shir, and then we're going to respond with the actual sources and see how accurate they were. So I want to give you one snippet that Rabbi Gold does. And those of you familiar with basic sources in the religious Zionism Haredi debate will recognize what Rabbi Berkowitz is talking about and may even know the Rabbi Gold's response before you hear it. But I think Rabbi Gold really does an amazing job. If I only come up to a small fraction of the way he did it, it would be my honor. Here's what Rabbi Berkowitz says.
Let us take examples. Let's take the very first example.
This is Rabbi Berkowitz.
The Halachik is that so long as Jews are in Golus, this is a Mishnah, it's a Gemara in Ksubis, it's a Halacha, the Rambam brings it down, all are in agreement without exception, there are no two opinions. Halacha, you're not allowed to go and start up with the nations of the world so long as Jews are in Golus. When start up, meaning provoke them, try to antagonize them, try to get them to war. You're not allowed to.
Where is that?
This is the Gemara in Ksubis. The Gemara learns it from different psukim. The Gemara says that the Jews swore that when they were going into Golus. That is part of accepting the fact that God has put us into Golus. If God put us into Golus, it's for a purpose. If we feel that we can end the Golus on our own, we are doubting God's having put us into Golus.
Okay, so everybody heard Rabbi Berkowitz in his lecture about religious Zionism. You didn't hear what he said? Were you able to hear him? Yes.
Yes.
Rabbi Berkowitz,
Yes.
in his statement, was talking about the Gimel Shvuot, the 3 oaths that the Jews supposedly took. One of them which prohibits the Jews from rebelling against the non-Jews. And he said it's clear halacha. Nobody ever doubted this halacha. This is a well-known halacha, he claims. And therefore, for religious Zionists to attempt to come back to the land of Israel before God has brought us back is against the halacha. That's his argument. Now, first of all, I find it very strange in general, philosophically, that when God punishes, we have to accept the punishment. I assume that Rabbi Berkowitz believes that when a person becomes sick, it's because God wills it. And yet, I assume that he goes to doctors. And he doesn't say, oh, if God willed the person to be sick, you shouldn't try to fight God. But the philosophy I don't understand either. But that's not what I want to talk about. And you'll see Rabbi Gold responded to the claim that this is what he called a halacha pruka, a halacha that nobody argues with. So here's Rabbi Gold's response.
This is clearly not halacha, not at all. In fact, it does not appear in the Rambam's Yavah Chazaka. It does not appear in any of the codes of law, not in the Rif, not in the Rosh, doesn't appear in the Tur Shulchan Aruch, is not brought in the Shulchan Aruch of Rabbi Yosef Karo. In fact, the one place where the Rambam does make mention of the Shvuos, which is toward the end of his letter to the Jews of Yemen, he says the following. Ulefi sheyoda Shlomo olav hasholem, because Shlomo of blessed memory knew the Ruach HaKodesh, with his divine spirit, Shahu Umar Hazod Ba'orach Zman Galuta Tiftsar Lihitno Ea Below Ita Haruya. The Jews will want during the time of the long Galus to begin to move toward Eretz Yisrael, not in the proper time, V'yovdu Bishvil Zeh, and they will be lost because of this. V'yavo Aleim Tzarot, and terrible trouble will befall them. His Hirami La'asod Zeh, he warned them that they should not do it. V'ishbiah ha'uma al derech mashal, and he had the people swear, and the Rambam says al derech mashal, this is a parable. There is no halacha. This is, say, good advice. The Maral refers to it as a gzeira.
Okay, so again, Rabbi, how do I get out of this now? Not sure. Okay, Rabbi Gold very clearly showed that Rabbi Berkowitz said in this case was simply not based on the sources. Rabbi Berkowitz had claimed that it's a well-known, well-accepted, universally accepted halakha. It's simply not. I would like to now start talking about the topic of Milchmet Mitzvah. So the first thing we'll start with, and I hope we can see the sources, we'll go to the Chumash, the Torah, and the Torah gives us many halachas. Rabbi Zevin counts something like 17 halachas that relate to war. Not halacha, 17 mitzvot. Of the 613 mitzvahs, there's something like 17 of them that directly relate to war. Do you all see the screen, the psukim from Dvarim now?
No, we see a list.
No, and I already got rid of that thing on the bottom. How do I? Here we go. Okay, stop share. Sorry about that. I was afraid we'd have some issues with this. Okay. Now you see the psukim in Dvarim?
No.
See the same list as before, sorry.
Well, thank you for letting me know. No, sorry. Okay.
Why
Now-
won't you share your whole screen instead of sharing just one
That's
window?
what I did. Sharing the screen is this up here, right? Where I'm pointing
I
at?
can't see your screen.
Okay, well, I just shared what I think is the whole screen.
It was there
Yeah.
for a minute.
I
We
see
have
you
something.
only sharing one window, the chosen window of your screen.
Okay, well, let's see what I can do about that. I'll just do one window at a time, and we'll see what happens. Okay, we'll do one window at a time. You see the psukim from Dvarim now. The
Yes.
Torah tells us,
Yes.
when you go to war against your enemy, do not fear your enemy. God is with you. Then the Psukim tell us that you should appoint a Kohen, a priest, who will go out with the people. And the priest will say to them, meaning a motivational speaker. And the motivational speaker will speak to them and tell them not to fear and to go and fight the enemy because God is with you. And then he will also give instruction. And he will tell them, speak to the people and say, if some person has built a new house and not yet dedicated it, let him go home and return to his house, lest he die in battle. And it continues. Maybe somebody planted a new vineyard and hasn't eaten from the fruit. Let him go home, lest he die in battle. And who's the person who married a new wife and hasn't yet lived with her? Let him go home, lest he die in battle. And the psukim go on, and they tell you, these are the people who are exempt from fighting. Meaning the Torah seems to think that going to war is something that the Jewish people do as a whole. There's no you go, you don't go. The Jewish people go out, and then the Torah tells us there are certain exceptions. That's the Torah. Now, we don't often we don't decide halacha from the Torah. So we're going to go right away to the next step. After we look at the psukim, the next place to look would be the Mishnah. And we're going to take a look now. Hold on. At the Mishnah. Again, you're not going to see it. Let's see if we can do this. Okay, do you now see the Mishnah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is the Mishnah in Sogta. And the Mishnah starts out, the Mishnah quotes the psukim in that we just saw, and it lists them all. It says, Mia Shabara Bayit, who's going to build a house, or Mia Isha Shanata Karam, who planted the vineyard, or Mia Isha Eris Isha, who got married. All of these, all Elu, Shomim Devrei Kohen, they hear the priest talking, and they go back, V'chozrim, they return from the war. They're not fully exempt from the war effort. Misapkin Mayin Umazon Umetanan Esadrachim. They still have to participate in the war effort. They're just not the combat soldiers. The Mishnah then continues, Ve'elu she'enan chozrin. There's a list of those who do not leave the war effort at all. They don't leave the combat zone. If your person built not a house, but only a gate, he didn't plant the full vineyard, he remarried his divorced wife, these people don't go back at all. And then it says, Ve'elu she'en zazim imkoman. There's a list of people who don't participate at all, not as combat soldiers, and not in the home front. And it lists those. And then it goes on and tells you that the motivational speaker, the Kohen, continues to talk to them and say there's one more category. Those who are fearful, those who might spread fear among the troops, those who might demoralize the troops, they go home as well. And then the Mishnah gives a crucial line. The Mishnah says, Bamed dvarim amurim. When are there any exemptions in the war? B'milchemet harashut, in an optional war. Aval b'milchemet mitzvah, in an obligatory war, in a war that's a mitzvah. Hakol yotzen, every Jew must participate. Afilu chotan michedro v'kala mechupata, even the bride and the groom. And Omer Rav Yehuda b'med dvarim amurim b'milchemet mitzvah. The same thing. He just uses different phrases, Mechamet Mitzvah as opposed to Mechamet Chova as opposed to Mechamet Mitzvah. But it seems that the Mishnah says all of these exemptions are only in one case, Mechamet Reshut. There's a two-tier system. There's Mechamet Reshut and Mechamet Mitzvah. In a Mechamet Reshut, we have exemptions. Mechamet Mitzvah, everybody, there is no exception, must participate. And what do we mean by everybody must participate? Well, the Chazon Ish. For those not familiar with the Chazon Ish, he was really the leader of the Haredi world. Hold on. Let's see if we can get the Chazon Ish up. How do I close this now? Now do you see my list?
Yeah.
And now you see the Chazon Ish.
Yes.
Okay, the Chazon Ish was the leader of the Haredi community, lived in Bnei Brak in the 1940s and 50s. And the Chazon Ish said very clearly, do you see my mouse?
Yeah.
Moving around up here on the top left?
Yes.
He says,
Yes.
over here, hold on a second. Sorry, page 2 of the Chazon Ish you want to go to. The Chazon Ish says over here that Nira, the Hadisnan, what we learned in the Mishnah, Mechemes Mitzvah, Afilu Chosn Mechedro, Lo Mayu Bizman Shetzrichen Lazosan Linitzachan Al Mechama. It's not talking about with a shortage of soldiers. The Pshita, obviously, if the Jews are engaged in a war and there's a shortage of soldiers, everybody must participate. Rather, the Mishnah says that in Milchemes Mitzvah, even a bride and groom have to go. He says that's talking about afilu b'zman she'ein tzarich ela mispar mesuyam. We only need a limited number of soldiers. Hayurshut l'kach chatan mechedro. The general in charge, the king, the government, can take whoever they want. She'ein lachzirun shum schus Milchemes Mitzvah. Chein b'Milchemes Reshut. An optional war, ain't a paturn, ela b'zman she'ein nitzachon Yisrael tluya ben. Shemispar tzava shetzorach ben yesh b'ladam. That even an optional war, those who are exempt only when there are enough soldiers. He said, obviously, if the battle is going to depend on how many people we have, we don't have enough. The Chazon Ish says that everybody must participate. Okay, so what we're missing now, what would seem to be crucial, is a definition. What is a Milchemet Mitzvah? What's an obligatory war? And what's a Milchemet Reshut? What's an optional war? And now we go back to the Gemara for that. The Gemara on that Mishnah that we looked at a minute ago gives us a definition. And the Gemara tells us, by the way, and the Rambam paskin like this. The Rambam had said earlier, when the people get an exemption, that's only by a Milchemet Reshut. Milchemet Mitzvah, kol yotzin. And now the Gemara tells us, what is Milchemet Mitzvah and what is a Milchemet Reshut? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, we'll give that here. Hold on. Amar Rava, Milchemet Yehoshua lechposh, the war that Joshua engaged in order to conquer the land, Divrei Hakol Chova. Milchamot Beit David L'Ravacha, the wars that King David engaged in order to expand his boundary, that's Divrei Hakol Reshut. Ki Pligi, and where there's a debate, is only about if it's some sort of preemptive strike. But everybody agrees, according to the Gemara, what is Milchemet Mitzvah? Conquering the land of Israel, or at least Joshua conquering the land of Israel. What's an optional war? Expanding the boundaries. And the Rambam rules very similar to this. The Rambam starts out, and this is going to be crucial. The Rambam's discussion of the laws of war, appear in a section called Hilchot Melachim, the law of kings. And under the law of kings, there are lots of different halachot. And the Rambam in the 5th chapter discusses war. And he starts off, Ein hamelech nilcham tchila ela Milchmet Mitzvah. A king, before he engages in other kinds of war, initially the only war he should do is Milchmet Mitzvah. And now the Rambam doesn't leave us hanging. He says, what is this obligatory war? That's the war to conquer the land of Israel for the 7 nations who occupied it. Milchemet Amalek, the war to annihilate Amalek. Ezrat Yisrael miyad tsar sheba alehem. And it's a war to save the Jews from an enemy that has attacked them. So the Rambam gives 3 definitions or 3 examples of a Milchemet Mitzvah. What is it? The 3 are the war of the capture the 7 nations, the war to annihilate Amalek, and a war to save Jews from an attacking enemy. Then the Rambam tells us, the king can engage in an optional war, and that's the kind of war where he wants to expand the boundaries or expand the glory of Israel. And he gives a very important distinction. Milchemet Mitzvah, the Rambam says, the king he doesn't have to get permission from the high court. The Rambam says if the king wants to engage in a Milchemet Mitzvah, he sees, I have a good opportunity to annihilate Amalek. It sounds like he could just go out and do it. And he forces the nation to participate. To do an optional war, he needed permission of the high court before he could engage in an optional war. Okay, so it seems pretty straightforward. The Rambam has told us what's the Milchemet Mitzvah, what's the Milchemet Reshut. Milchemet Mitzvah has 3 definitions. Milchemet Reshut is any other war, and then we have the rules about you have exemptions, Milchemet Mitzvah. You don't have exemptions, Milchemet Reshut. A king can engage in Milchemet Mitzvah, it sounds like, on his own. Milchemet Reshut, he needs permission from the high court. It seems pretty straightforward. And now what I would like to do is see what Rabbi Berkowitz has to say about this. So we're going to now go to Rabbi Berkowitz and hear what he has to say.
Now, first of all, it is clear from the Rambam, both from the title of this section in Rambam, as well as from these halachas, that going to war really calls for a king.
Does everybody see and hear Rabbi Berkowitz?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so just this is the key point. Listen to what he says.
Of this section in Rambam, both from the title of this section in Rambam, as well as from these halachas, that going to war really calls for a king. There's no mention of war without a king. Whether it's Milchemet Mitzvah, Milchemet Reshus, the halachas of milchama, of war, call for a king. When Shmuel Hanavi is approached by Klal Yisrael to appoint a king, they say straight out, She'elech lefanenu, who's going to go in front of us in battle. And that's the way it was. If you look through all of, whether it's David HaMelech or all of the kings, both in Yehuda and Yisrael, in Sefer Malachim, the king led the nation in battle. But the Rambam says a chiddush, all you need is the king. For Milchemet Mitzvah, he does not need a permission of the Sanhedrin. Now this is the Rambam Shita, at least in the Yad here in Mishnah Torah.
Okay, so what Rabbi Berkowitz says over here, at the very beginning, he says, from the fact that the Rambam places this in the law of kings, this indicates that you need a king for war. And furthermore, he says that we never heard of such a concept of war without a king. That war, by definition, requires an anointed Jewish king. a fascinating argument to make. Because, again, if we go back and we look at the Rambam did not say that. The Rambam said that when you have a king, all right, the king should not engage in wars other than Milchmet Mitzvah. The Rambam did not say the converse. The Rambam didn't say you can't have a halachically sanctioned war without a king. More than that, the fact that the Rambam placed these laws in Hilchos Malachim is exactly what Rabbi Berkowitz said, except he didn't say it clearly. He said when the Jews asked for a king, they said, and he'll lead us in battle. And Shmuel Hanavi said, yes, and the king will take your people to go to war. Meaning that an essential role of the king is his role in fighting wars. It doesn't mean that necessary for war is to have a king. And just to give you a few counterexamples, later on in Hilchos Malachim, the Rambam puts all of the laws about Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the 7 Noahide laws, all the laws that apply to non-Jews. It would be very strange to say that those laws don't apply if you don't have a king, just because the Rambam put them in Hilchos Malachim. He put them in Hilchos Malachim for a different reason, that when we have a king, the king makes us more of a united Jewish nation, and there's Jews, and then you have the B'nai Noach. Or, I think an even stronger example, where does the Rambam place the laws of Hallel? Hallel that we say on the holidays, Hallel that we say on Hanukkah, that we say on Yom Ha'atzmaut, that we say half Hallel Rosh Chodesh. Where are those laws? If you asked me, I would have thought those laws should be in the section about prayer and Hilchos Tefillah. But the Rambam thought otherwise. Where did the Rambam put the laws of Hallel? The Rambam put them in Hilchos Megillah v'Chanukah, specifically in the section about Chanukah. And he tells you, all those days of Chanukah, you say Hallel. And he goes on and on and on. We're not going to learn Hilchos Chanukah today. But the Rambam put all the laws of Chanukah, all the laws of Hallel in the laws of Chanukah. Why? If I was following Rabbi Berkowitz's understanding, it would be because, well, to say Hallel, I need Chanukah. But it's the exact opposite. He put them there because an essential feature of Chanukah is the Hallel. But there are a lot of other days when you do Hallel as well. So too, an essential obligation of the king is his conducting war. Therefore, he put that in the section of the laws of king. But it's not that in order to have war, you need a king. So I find it very interesting. And again, there may be other ways of understanding this, but I think that some of these counterexamples make it very clear that the need, that the Rambam put the laws of war in the section about kings is to tell us something about a king, not to tell us something about war. And I don't know of any other sources that seem to require a king. Now, the Rambam is not the only one who discussed these topics. So let's see what Rabbi Berkowitz tells us about the Ramban.
The Ramban, at the end of Sefer HaMitzvahs, argues with what the Rambam writes. Well, first he's arguing.
Just to clarify, the Sefer HaMitzvot, the Rambam has this Halakhic work, the Yad Chazaka, or the Mishnah Torah, which is what we've seen till now. The Rambam also has his Sefer HaMitzvot. The Sefer HaMitzvot is the Rambam's listing of the 613 commandments. At the beginning of it, he gives his rules of how he's defining a mitzvah, how he's deciding what to put in the 613, what not to put in the 613, and then he delineates all the 613 commandments. The Ramban, Nachmanides, argued on both. He has principles that he disagreed with, as well as certain mitzvahs that he thinks were left out. And here Rabbi Berkowitz is telling us about one of those things that the Ramban added.
That the Rambam doesn't bring a mitzvah, that the king has to consult with the Sanhedrin and the Urim V'Tumim. He writes that he's talking about the Urim V'Tumim. V'ushe mitzvah ala melech. He says this is a mitzvah that the Rambam did not count. It's a mitzvah on the king, Ola Shofet, Hamotzi Ha'am La Melchama, Be Milchemes Rishus, Be Milchemes Mitzvah, Lish'ol Be'urim V'tumim Tchila, V'al Pihem Yisnaheg.
Okay, so Berkowitz quotes here Ramban. The Ramban, Nachmanides, says there's a mitzvah the Rambam left out, and he tells us which mitzvah he would remove from the 613 of the Rambam, and he says that he would add instead this mitzvah that the king, when he goes out to war, has to consult with the Urim V'Tumim. Well, let's take a look at what the Ramban said. Here is the Ramban. And the Ramban says, V'yeshli mitzvah mistapek. There's a mitzvah that I think has to be v'hushi yearly mitzvah al hamelech o al hashofet umi sha'am b'shuto lotziim letzava b'mechamid reshut. So he says there is a commandment, there is a mitzvah on either the king or the judge or whoever it is who is authorized to lead the Jews in a mechamid reshut. And it's the mitzvah of this person, and we have three options here. It's a king, it's a shofet, it's a leader who leads them to war, that when there's a war, he should go out, he should consult with the Urim V'Tumim before going out to war. Now, what's fascinating here is Rabbi Berkowitz, when he continues his explanation, he says, no mitzvah today could be a mitzvah, a Milchemet Mitzvah, because the Ramban requires that the king consult with the Urim V'Tumim. What's very interesting is that the Ramban nowhere gave this as a conditional. The Ramban never said, if you don't consult with the Urim V'Tumim, it's not a Milchemet Mitzvah. The Ramban said, when there is a war, there is a mitzvah to consult with the Urim V'Tumim. If you don't do the mitzvah, you violated a mitzvah. It doesn't change the categorization of the war. It's very similar to, let me pick another mitzvah. If you go look at the Rambam, and the Ramban doesn't disagree, nobody disagrees, there's a mitzvah called Yad V'Yated. In a war, we'll see in a minute, maybe only a Milchemet Mitzvah, there's an obligation on the Jewish army to maintain a holy environment in the military camp. And part of that is that you have to have a separate area designated outside of the military camp where one goes to relieve themselves. And in your military equipment, you even have to have a shovel in order to bury after you relieve yourself. That's a mitzvah. That's a mitzvah from the Torah called Yad V'Yated. Nobody argues that that's a biblical commandment. And yet it would seem absurd to say that if the Jewish army did not do the mitzvah of Yad and Yated, that would say that this Milchemet Mitzvah is no longer categorized as a Milchemet Mitzvah. It would simply mean that the Jews didn't carry out this particular mitzvah. So to here, all the Ramban said is that there is a positive obligation upon the leader, whoever it may be, to consult the Urim V'Tumim. And if they didn't, they violated this mitzvah. It doesn't downgrade the war from Milchemet Mitzvah to Milchemet Reshut, or Milchemet Reshut to something else. And just to continue here on this Ramban, Rabbi Berkowitz also says,
based on the Ramban, it's clear that you cannot have Milchemet Mitzvah today. Because you need a Melech, Sanhedrin, and Urim V'Tumim. How about the Rambam? The Rambam just seems to say that you need a Melech. He doesn't mention Urim V'Tumim, and he says clearly that you don't need the Sanhedrin for that. We have the stira from the Rambam in his Agdama. But it would seem like, according to the Rambam at least, you need a king. And without a king, it doesn't work. The Ramban added the word shofet, which means the shoftim in the days of the shoftim, before the Beis Hamikdash, we didn't yet have a king, but we had Urim V'Tumim and we had a Sanhedrin. The shoftim too could take the people out to battle. They also had the status of king with regard to battle. So
Rabbi Berkowitz is saying over here that this Ramban that we just saw teaches us, first of all, that Ramban holds that without Urim v'Tumim, you can't have a Milchmet Mitzvah, something that, as I explained, seems difficult. And furthermore, he interprets this word of shofet as being not a judge at some period in Jewish history, but specifically after the time of Moshe, after Moses, there was Joshua, after Yoshua, there was the period of the Shoftim, and that was then followed by the kings, Shaul and David and Shlomo, etc. And he's understanding that the Ramban, strangely, is telling us about a mitzvah that applied to those Shoftim. Why the Ramban would have what is that? I don't know. It's also, he's clearly saying that it's mitzvah ala melech, or ala shofet, or umi shaha'am b'shuto la'otziim le'tzava b'milchemet rishus. It's talking about somebody, any leader, any general, any elected democratic leader, any leader who takes the people out to war. Meaning, Rabbi Berkowitz forgot to quote his last few words here. Umi shaha'am b'shuto la'otziim le'tzava b'milchemet rishus. And he therefore interpreted shofet as being very narrow, the period of the shoftim, of the judges. Okay, so he has argued that according to the Rambam, you can't have a Milchmet Mitzvah today because you need a king. And he has argued that according to the Ramban, Nachmanides, we can't have a Milchmet Mitzvah because you need Urim v'Tumim. As I've mentioned, it seems to me that neither one of them seems to be rooted in sources. The Rambam never stated that you need a king. He simply said that the king, when he becomes king, should engage in Milchmet Mitzvah. And the Ramban never said that the definition of the war is dependent on following this mitzvah. He said that when there is a war, this is one of the mitzvot that applies. There's the mitzvah to send back the guy who built a new house. There's the mitzvah to make sure you have a shovel among your equipment. And there's a mitzvah to consult the Urim v'Tumim. But not fulfilling any of these mitzvahs in no way, it seems to me, would change the status of the war. There is one interesting Rambam, which may say that there's a problem defining something as a Milchmet Mitzvah. Let's hear Rabbi Berkowitz on this Rambam.
The Rambam, in his Hagdama to Sefer HaMitzvahs, the Hagdama of Sefer HaMitzvahs consists of first the Shoroshim, where he defines what is counted as a mitzvah and what not. And then, at the very end, he gives a brief introduction to mitzvahs. One of the things he mentions is that some mitzvahs only apply when there's a Beis HaMikdash, other mitzvahs apply all the time. And he mentions that all of those things that obviously need a Beis HaMikdash, he doesn't have to go and repeat that it does not apply when there is no Beis HaMikdash. And he gives this example. And he writes, V'yodua, shahamolchomos v'kibush ha'arotzos. You don't have that in front of you. The milchamos and kibush ha'arotzos lo yeh ela b'melech uva'atzas sanhedri gedola v'kohen godel.
Okay, very interesting source. And as we'll see, I'm not exactly sure what to do with it. But, well, let's take a look. Here is the Rambam in his introduction to his Sefer HaMitzvot. In the introduction, as I said, the Rambam lays out all his principles. And in the Sefer HaMitzvot, in general, the Rambam lists the 613 mitzvot, and then for each mitzvah, he gives you basic rules about the mitzvah, including when it applies and to whom it applies. Men, women, Kohanim, Leviim, when, with the Beis HaMikdash, not with the Beis HaMikdash, in the land of Israel, out of the land of Israel. And at the very, very, literally the last lines of his introduction, he says that things that don't need to be said, I'm not going to say. I'm going to be concise. For example, everybody knows in Anoshim Chayavot certain things. We know that women don't participate in the Bezdin system. They're not witnesses, they're not judges. Women can't offer sacrifices by their own hands. They're not Kohanim. Any tzorech lomar zot in nashim chayavet ba. Because any mitzvah that everybody knows doesn't apply to women, like those that have to do with courts or those that apply to war. The Rambam says, I'm not going to mention that it doesn't apply to women. So too, he says, v'yadua gamken shehakorbanot kulam lo yakrivim ki'im b'migdash v'shelo hudra avoda chutz lazar. Everybody knows that sacrifices are only the base of Migdash. Furthermore, v'chein din nefashos lo yadunim behem ela b'yos hamigdash kaim. You can't judge capital cases if there's no base of Migdash. He goes on and on, saying other things that don't apply. And he says, Everybody knows any mitzvah that has to do with sacrifices, or Beit HaMikdash, or capital punishment, or high court, or benavi, or melech, or b'milchemet reshut, lo etzrach lomar ba, zod lo t'chayev elav nei abayit. I'm not going to have to state that it only applies when there's a Beit HaMikdash, because everybody knows that. Now, I just want to point out, it says here, O b'milchemet reshut. I took this from a version of the Rambam that was printed in Lakewood, just so you know that I wasn't looking for an easy way out here. But, in many other versions, actually says over here, Milchmet Reshut or Milchmet Mitzvah. And the Rambam here, very puzzlingly, says that sacrifices, capital cases, things that have to do with king or with war, only apply if there's a temple. If there's no temple, they don't apply. And therefore, he says, I'm not going to write that they only apply, that they don't apply if there's no Beit HaMikdash. This whole paragraph is very strange because from the beginning, he says sacrifices only apply if there's a temple. The Rambam himself, in his Yad Chazaka, when he writes about sacrifices, says explicitly that you could bring sacrifices even without a Beit HaMikdash. As long as you have the altar and Kohanim who are dressed in the Big Kahuna, you could bring sacrifices even without an existing temple. And he says you can't have war without a temple. As we saw in his Laws of King, he never says that that's a requirement. So this whole paragraph is one big enigma. From here, I wouldn't say Rambam says Milchmet Mitzvah only if there's a temple, because then I'd have to say Rambam says sacrifices only if there's a temple, and he doesn't say that. He later on says explicitly that it's not the case. So I'm not sure what to do with this. As Rabbi Berkowitz himself said, that this piece of his introduction, and this is literally the very, very end of his introduction, seems to contradict what he said in his Yad Chazaka. So I wouldn't learn anything from this. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, the Rambam isn't the only one who gave us a definition. The Ramban gave us a definition of a Milchmet Mitzvah. The Ramban says another law that the Rambam left out is this mitzvah over here. Mitzvah Revi Shestavu is l'reshet ha'aretz shenotan ha'el yidbarach v'yizalel l'avotenu l'avram Yitzchak Yaakov. It's a positive commandment, one of the 613 commandments, to inherit the land of Israel, to conquer it, to settle it. We shouldn't leave mina umot ol l'shmama. We are not permitted to leave it under the rule of other nations, nor to leave it desolate. It's a mitzvah to settle the land. It's a verse in the Torah. God said you should conquer the land and settle it. Because I gave it to you to settle. And the Ramban continues. And he says, V'zuhi, at the very top here, V'zuhi shechachamim koromoto milchemet mitzvah. This conquering of the land, the Ramban says, is a Milchemet Mitzvah. He says when the sages talked about Milchemet Mitzvah over there in the Mishnahs and Sota, it was talking about this. It was talking about the war to conquer the land. He says, hooray, down here, I don't know if you see my mouse. Hooray, nitztavinu b'kibush b'chol hadorot. It's not limited to Joshua. It's not limited to when they first came into the land. This is a positive commandment for all generations, according to the Ramban, to conquer the land. So we have seen now, according to the Rambam, there are three types of Milchmet Mitzvah. Again, we want to know, is what's going on today Milchmet Mitzvah? Is this war that unfortunately we've been involved in now for over a year, is a Milchmet Mitzvah? The Rambam gave us three types of Milchmet Mitzvah: conquering the land in the time of Joshua, defeating Amalek, and defending the Jews against an enemy who attacks. Ramban adds another category, according to him, of Milchmet Mitzvah, and that is conquering the land of Israel in any and all generations. We saw that Rabbi Berkowitz wanted to say, despite the Ramban, maybe it's not Milchmet Mitzvah, because he thinks that according to the Rambam, you need a king. I don't see that in the sources. He said it's not a Milchmet Mitzvah according to the Ramban, because the Ramban says that you have to consult the V'Tumim for it to be Milchmet Mitzvah. Again, I don't see that in the sources. The Ramban seems to simply be saying to be that during a war, you should consult with the V'Tumim. But that doesn't change the categorization. All of this is sources from the time of the Gemara and medieval period. As I mentioned, there aren't a lot of sources that deal with Milchmet Mitzvah in most of the Halakhic literature. Fascinatingly, there is actually, as Rabbi Berkowitz pointed out in the Mishpacha article, there is a tshuva of Rav Moshe Feinstein, a respondent that Rav Moshe Feinstein wrote. Very difficult to understand exactly what he wants. I would like to read it with you, and let's see what we can make of it. Rav Moshe Feinstein usually has tshuvas with lots of sources from the Gemaras, analysis of Zivotofsky, other Rishonim. He doesn't usually bring later authorities, and he usually answers very practical, specific questions. Here is a very short, we'll see in a minute, tshuva of Rav Moshe, written Kafhei Tishrei Tafshin Lamed. It turns out that's immediately after the signing of the Camp David Accords. This is 1978, immediately after the signing of the Camp David Accords. And it was written to Rabbi Nochem Trabnik, who was the chief rabbi of Kfar Chabad. Now, unfortunately, and this comes up more than once, in the Igros Moshe, Rav Moshe Feinstein doesn't give us the question. We don't know what he was asked. But from the answer, you could sometimes tell what the question is. It seems to me, well, we know Chabad was very against the Camp David Accords. It seems here that the chief rabbi of Kfar Chabad was trying to get out of Rav Moshe Feinstein also in opposition to the Camp David Accords. Rav Moshe Feinstein doesn't fall for that. He starts, you know my way. I don't rush to answer. Things that I'm not asked, I'm not going to answer the things that I wasn't asked. Even if it's a private question, I deal with personal, specific questions. Obviously, Rav Trebnik had asked him a question about if the Camp David Accords are permitted, should the state of Israel engage in it, something of that nature. And Rav Moshe Feinstein says, that's not my nature. I don't answer those kind of questions. I answer private questions. Also, only if it's not going to infringe on another rabbi. V'shela klolis, a general question. I don't answer general questions. So far, this first part, he's saying, I don't like this question. And if we skip down to the end, he says also, I don't think about this kind of question you asked me. Leaders of Israel aren't asking me these kind of questions. And he goes on and says, I don't answer. Just this little piece in the middle is relevant. It says, maybe you heard something I once said in a shir to my students. Masha ani sover, I hold, she'inyan milchama, keven shenogel lepikuach nefesh, tzorch tzivui miuchad v'tumim v'sanhedrin. Maybe you heard that I hold, he says, that a war obviously involves life and death decisions, therefore it needs v'tumim and Sanhedrin, And now Rav Moshe Feinstein says something fascinating. Af Milchmet Mitzvah ke Milchmet Amalek. He says even a Milchmet Mitzvah needs the instruction of the high court and the Uvatumim. All the kings in the Bible, he says only if they had instructions from the court or from the Uvatumim did they go fight Amalek. So Rav Moshe Feinstein brings no Gemara, no Rambam, simply a historical proof from the Tanakh, from the Bible, that from Milchmet Mitzvah you need Uvatumim and the High Court. Now, I would read into this, you could tell me if you agree here, that if a king violates this and goes out to fight Amalek, he's still calling it a Milchmet Mitzvah. He says, after Milchmet Mitzvah, Milchmet Amalek, we need these things. He still calls it Milchmet Mitzvah. He says, more than that, he says, this is obvious. When in the time of the second Beit HaMikdash, when the Greeks, the Yevonim attacked the Jews, now the Jews need to save themselves. In that case, he says, the third type of Milchmet Mitzvah, at least that's how I read this, he doesn't use the word Milchmet Mitzvah, the third type of Milchmet Mitzvah in the Rambam, then you can go out even without Uvatumah Sanhedrin. And the example he brings is that the Maccabees, when the Maccabees went out to fight when they were attacked, they went out. There was no king, there was no Uvatumim, there was no permission of the Sanhedrin. They simply went out because they were defending themselves. And this is, if you remember, the third category of Milchmet Mitzvah according to the Rambam. And Rav Moshe Feinstein seems to be saying that you could indeed go out without any permission. So again, just before I ask for your feedback on this, because I'd be interested to hear how you read this, Rav Moshe, just to go back to, hold on. Well, we saw at the very, very beginning, Rabbi Berkowitz quoted the Rambam as saying, quoted the Igros Moshe as saying, the tshuva in which he writes that to meet the definition of a Milchmet Mitzvah, you need a Jewish king, you need the Uvatumim. Rav Moshe Feinstein did not say Jewish king, he said Sanhedrin, he said Uvatumim. I don't think Rav Moshe said to meet the definition. He said it's a mitzvah when you go out on Milchmet Mitzvah to do those. And Rav Moshe Feinstein had the third category. He first started with Amalek, and he said what Rav Berkowitz says. The third category of self-defense, Rav Moshe says, you don't need these things. Now, again, this is not a very simple Igros Moshe to understand, but that's my understanding of it. And that's what, again, sorry, let's just play. He says it in his lecture.
Rav Moshe Feinstein was asked this shaila. Well, let's see what he writes. Maybe they heard things that I spoke out as we were learning to my Talmidim, which is not psak.
And he said it's not psak. Meaning again, Rav Moshe was talking theory. Rav Moshe Feinstein was simply engaged in the Beis Medrash. And he at one point said this. He gave no psak not to the state of Israel, nor to any individual.
Rav Moshe certainly is paskening like the Ramban, not like the Rambam that we have here. He is paskening that for Milchemes Mitzvah, you need the Sanhedrin and the Urim V'Tumim.
And again, the Ramban did not say that.
Not
The Ramban
paskening
said,
everything.
well, I'm sorry?
He wasn't paskening.
No, and the Ramban said there's a mitzvah that when you go to war, you ask Urim V'Tumim. He never said that was part of the definition of Milchmet Mitzvah. I see it's late, and I want to get to three quick 20th century sources. So I'm going to not play the rest of this piece. The whole shir is online. You could listen. So what I would like to do now is ask, are there any contemporary authorities who have actually ruled on this question? And for that, I'm not going to go to Rav Moshe Feinstein or we saw it. Let's see what some Israeli Zivotofsky have said in the 20th century. So the first one we're going to start with is Rav Zevin. Rav Zevin is a very interesting rabbi, posek. He wrote a book called L'or Halakha. It came out before the 1948 war. He then published a revised edition after the 1948 war, and he was very clear. You all could see the source here? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, he says, "B'muvan ha'mitzumtzam shel zman hazeh b'nogeh le'milchama." In the early 1950s, there's a that we've been privileged to have an independent Jewish state. War of independence, barur. It's clear. It's totally obvious to him that it has the halacha of Milchmet Mitzvah. The two reasons that we saw. One, to save the Jews from an enemy that came upon them, the Rambam. The kibush aretz, Ramban, doing mitzvah aseh, who says both according to the Rambam and Ramban, this is a Milchmet Mitzvah. And then we have, hold on, the Tzitz Eliezer. The Tzitz Eliezer, one of the most well-known authorities in the land of Israel in the mid to late 20th century. And he has two things. First, he says over here, he had a very, very long tshuva where he talks about war, and he says, "Hamilchama ha'chshaviyot." This is his summary because it was too long. So he then put his own summary. And he brings point by point the summary of his very, very long tshuva. He says, "Hamilchama ha'astuyi po ba'arkenu kedusha ilidat haRamban Milchmet Mitzvah ki mitzvah aleinu b'chol adod lo lanechet haaretz biyad zolotenu." He says this is clearly a Milchmet Mitzvah. All the wars that we've had, War of Independence, 6-Day War, certainly the current war, because the Ramban says that to keep the land of Israel in Jewish hands is by definition a Milchmet Mitzvah. So the Ramban says, so the Tzitz Eliezer says that the current wars are Milchmet Mitzvah. Then, in another place, in a fascinating tshuva, he says, this is a very, very long tshuva, trying to explain, those of you still not living in the land of Israel, this tshuva is to explain why, according to halacha, it would be a very good idea to make aliyah. And then he adds a very interesting point. According to the current situation here in the land of Israel, that we find ourselves in, that nowadays, we're surrounded by enemies who want to swallow up the country. You outside of the land of Israel, you have an obligation, he says, to make aliyah and join us here in defending the land. A Milchmet Mitzvah is that if we're attacked by our enemies, and the Tzitz Eliezer of Waldenberg says that today, and he's not alive anymore. Certainly, if he was alive today in 2024, we're surrounded by enemies who want to eat us up. He says this is unquestionably a Milchmet Mitzvah, and therefore, those of you not yet in the land of Israel, that would be one more reason, one more motivation why you should make aliyah, participate in the Milchmet Mitzvah. And the final one that I want to show you is a very interesting one. Rabbi Yoshev. Rabbi Yoshev was considered one of the leading poskim of, again, second half of the 20th century, accepted by the Haredim. Do you all see the page here from Rabbi Yoshev? This is an amazing thing. Rav Shilat, who is the Rosh Yeshiva in the Shivan Ma'ale Adumim today, his name used to be Rav Greenspan, and during the Yom Kippur War, 1973, he was in the army, and lucky for him, he was not stationed in the Golan or in the Sinai, but he was stationed on the Jordanian border. And as we know, the Jordanians never attacked. So Rav Shilat learned all of Masechet Brachot during that period, and he wrote a book about his Chidushei Torah that he thought of during the Yom Kippur War. In the back of this book, he has a tshuva that he received from Rebbe Yoshev. Rebbe Yoshev was, again, one of the leading Haredi poskim in the land of Israel. It's dated 12 Cheshvan Tavshin Lamed Daled, meaning sometime in late October, November 1973. It's clear that Rebbe Yoshev wrote this during the Yom Kippur War. And he addressed it to Yitzchak Greenspan, today known as Rav Yitzchak Shilat. And in there, as part of the tshuva, it's a tshuva discussing this mitzvah of Yad V'Yated, of having a holy camp. He says that V'anan, we halo b'Milchemet Mitzvah kaskinen. Your whole question about if this law applies nowadays or not, we are discussing a Milchemet Mitzvah, meaning this is a very practical question. It was written in 1973, November 1973, a soldier fighting in the war. And Rabbi Yoshev says, the question you ask me deals with a Milchemet Mitzvah. What's amazing is when this was republished in Rabbi Yoshev's book of Tshuvas, you'll notice, unlike every other tshuva in this book, or almost everyone, I looked through it, where there's an addressee and a date, those were left out over here. Notice it's missing. There's no addressee. It doesn't say Rav Greenspan, and it doesn't say November 1973. It has the entire tshuva. It does say that Avol b'Milchemet Mitzvah, you might think that in our theoretical discussion about this law, I'm talking about Milchemet Mitzvah. No, that's not what Rabbi Yoshev meant. Rabbi Yoshev is talking to Rav Greenspan, Rav Shilat, about a very specific question in November 1973, and he's calling it a Milchemet Mitzvah. Very troubling. So, somebody who I was discussing this with in our shul said very simply, he said, all of the people, and not necessarily Rabbi Berkowitz, I'm not picking on Rabbi Berkowitz, but all the discussion about what's the definition of a Milchemet Mitzvah, and is the current war Milchemet Mitzvah or not, and can I darshan in some word of the Ramban or the Rambam? He says all of that is clouding the discussion. And I think what he meant to say is, it seems to me that in halacha we have categorizations. So, for example, there are different halachot about Shabbat and a sick person. If he is in danger of dying, if he is merely slightly ill, if he has what's called a mir michush, he doesn't feel well. Is he what's called a chola nafalamita? Is a chola kol gufo? Is a chola echadei? We have a lot of categorizations of a sick person. Nobody would say that if he doesn't fit some sort of categorizations, he's not sick. He's a chola. I know he's sick. And now in halacha, we need to define what kind of sick he is. Chola kol gufo, chola echadei michush be'alma, chola sheish b'sakan, chola eid b'sakan. But everybody agrees that he's sick, and now I need to categorize him. It would seem to me that's what's going on here as well. There's a war. You can't tell me that what's taking place today is not a milchama. And now I need to categorize it. Is a Milchemet Mitzvah, Milchemet Rishus, Milchemet Chova, an illegal war, but it's a war. You can't do like many people do, and Rabbi Berkowitz, as part of his shir that I didn't cut out this piece, he says, for sure, it's a big mitzvah to save Jews. But what we're engaged in is not Milchemet Mitzvah, it's the mitzvah of lo ta'amod al dam re'acha. The mitzvah of, if you see someone drowning, you must save them. But it's that mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah of Milchemet Mitzvah, Milchemet Rishus, and I just don't see it. That discussion doesn't seem to even be recognized in the reality. There's a milchama, there's a war, and now I need to categorize the war. And it has to fit into something. An illegal war, but it's a war. Just like nobody will say, well, if a guy is not in his bed, it can't be that he's a chola. No, he's not a chola shenafel lemitaso, but he is a chola. He's a sick person. So too, there's a war, and I just need to know what category it falls in. And all of the pilpul seems to be clouding this very simple statement. And it's very important because while many people who say it's not a Milchemes Mitzvah will agree there's a mitzvah of lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, to save another Jew, there are vast differences between Milchemes Mitzvah and lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. For example, every Jew is obligated to save every other Jew. If you see a Jew drowning, you have to save him. Well, what if I see a Jew who needs a kidney? Do I have an obligation to give the kidney? No. I'm allowed to, but one is not obligated to risk their lives because of the mitzvah of lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. One is obligated to risk their life by definition in a Milchemes Mitzvah. And there are a lot of other differences between lo ta'amod and Milchemes Mitzvah. So I just want to end with a quote from two sources here. First, Rav Ariel. Where are we here? You know what? Before we get to Rav Ariel, hold on, sorry. Do you see Rav Ariel now? Someone just confirm.
No, sorry.
You don't. Okay, let's try that again.
Yes, we can hear it. Yes.
Here we go. Do you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So a few quick sources about Milchemes Mitzvah. The Rambam in Hilchot Shabbat, he is telling us when are you allowed to violate Shabbos in order to save someone, to help somebody. He starts over here. Meaning non-Jews, should sorrow ala Yoris Yisrael, who attacked a Jewish city. If it's simply they're robbers, Shabbos, you can't launch a war against thieves. However, if they want to kill Jews, or they started a war, or they, no reason other than anti-Semitism, are starting up with a Jewish city. Mitzvah akol Yisrael shichol and lavav v'letzeit lazor lachem shebamitzvah. It's an obligation of all Jews to go out and help them. What's the Rambam talking about here? Here he said on financial issues you don't make a war. Implying here he's talking about war. And what kind of war? If non-Jews attack a Jewish city, we violate Shabbos. It's a mitzvah, it's an obligation on all Jews to help them. And based on what he said in Hilchos Melachim, I would argue that he's talking about a Milchemes Mitzvah over here. He didn't call it that because that wasn't relevant. Here in Hilchos Shabbos, he's simply talking about if you could be Mechalel Shabbat or not. But he clearly says, and this, I think, is even talking about not in the land of Israel, not the entire country of Israel being attacked. If a Jewish city, some other place, is being attacked, it's a Milchemes Mitzvah for Jews to go out and help them and to save them. And you violate Shabbos. And here's the English and so on. And Rav Ariel, he brings it in a much broader context. There are those who want to avoid participating in what seems to be obviously Milchemes Mitzvah. Rav Ariel says a Milchemes Mitzvah is much broader than just saving Jewish lives. It's not lo ta'amod. It's Kiddush Hashem. Mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem is a super mitzvah. The mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem overrides Pikuach Nefesh, meaning one has to risk their lives for Kiddush Hashem. When you're planning a war strategy, you can't take into account that some soldier's life will be endangered. You need to plan the strategy in order to win the war. He said, winning a Milchemes Mitzvah is more than just saving Jewish lives. It's the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. When the Jewish nation is downtrodden, that's a Chilul Hashem. When the Jewish nation goes out to save Jewish lives and to protect the honor of the Jewish people, that's a Kiddush Hashem. Rav Amital said it very beautifully. He said that why, he said, why was our generation, he said, of the Holocaust survivors privileged to see the establishment of a Jewish country? He says, were we holier, were we bigger tzaddikim than all the generations that came before us? Why were we so privileged? And he said his understanding is that the Holocaust was the greatest chilul Hashem in history. When the Jewish nation, as a nation, is so downtrodden, that's a chilul Hashem. The state of Israel, he said, gives an opportunity for a national Kiddush Hashem, which is a different order of magnitude than when individual Jews make Kiddush Hashem. And what Rav Ariel is saying, Rav Ariel is a well-known posek today in the religious Zionist community. He's saying that winning a Milchmet Mitzvah is a national Kiddush Hashem. And that's why one has to participate. That's why one risks their lives for a Milchmet Mitzvah. And the Rambam sees it as such also. The Rambam says, "V'chol hanilcham b'chol libo b'lo pachad." Anybody who participates in the war, in a Milchmet Mitzvah, without fear, v'tiyeh kavanato lekadesh et Hashem levad. And his goal in participating, his sole intention is sanctification of God's name, and then you get all these promises from God. In other words, he says that Milchmet Mitzvah is not just another mitzvah, it's the super mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. And I think it's an amazing thing what we've seen here in Israel in the last year, how large numbers of religious soldiers have gone to battle, have risked their life. Many have unfortunately given their life because what they understand, and what seems to me from the sources as I presented them, and again, there are other people who seem to have other opinions, but what they understand to be a Milchmet Mitzvah, a milchama that's defending the Jewish nation from a barbaric enemy that's attacking from all sides, and that they're participating in a Kiddush Hashem to negate the huge Chilul Hashem of what took place Simchas Torah a little over a year ago. And all I could say is kol hakavod to all of those boys, and I really don't see the other side. So if there are any questions, comments, I see there are a lot of things in the chat. I haven't been able to see them until now. And that's, if you have questions, comments.
Yes. Have you read the book by Rabbi Brody, the Ethics of Our Fighters?
I have not read it. I've seen reviews of it. I have not seen the book.
I'm reviewing it. I think it's really good, and it agrees with you completely. It's very good in my view. So I just thought I'd say. Okay.
There are actually two recent books on this subject, and neither of them have I seen at all. One of them is, as you said, Rabbi Brody's book. The other is by a guy from California. He's I can't remember his name right now. He's a well-known philanthropist, as well as he writes fascinating Halakhic work, and he's written in Hebrew. Rabbi Brody's book is in English. He's written in Hebrew a book about the laws of war, and his name has escaped me right now. But I haven't seen either of them. And again, let me just make it clear, I've used Rabbi Berkowitz as a foil in this shir. I don't know him personally. He has a reputation, indeed, as a well-known Talmid Chacham. There was nothing here that was said that is personal against him. I hope that you understand it as rather a Halakhic Torah disagreement. And again, there was nothing personal involved, but I found it in the model of Rabbi Gold to use him as a foil in order to present the other side. So again, if there are any questions.
Rav Ari Adilan, I'll just say the person you're talking about is Zvi Reisman.
Yes, correct. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. If there are other questions.
So Rabbi Ari, what is the main Haredi justification for resisting conscription?
So I don't want to try to present their position. From what I understand, their main the reason they don't want to go, this is not the justification, but the reason they don't want to go is they view it as a risk to their lifestyle, a risk that some of the boys may come back not Haredi or not religious. And that's their main reason for not wanting to go. Their justifications are many and varied. they'll quote these sources and say it's not Milchmet Mitzvah. They'll quote the Rambam at the end of Hilchos Shmita of Yovel that supposedly they interpret as saying that those who are dedicated to Torah are exempt from participating. They'll quote sources, and they were legitimate sources, that say that Talmidei Chachamim don't need protection because their Torah is their protection. All of these arguments are, I think, easily refutable. And Rav Aaron Lichtenstein did a phenomenal job. It's available online. He had an article in Tradition magazine called something about the theory or philosophy of Hesder. And Rav Lichtenstein argues that the Ramban was the biggest supporter of the Hesder idea. And it's a phenomenal article. And he talks about these various arguments. The one from Shevet Levi, the other from Hilchos Shmita of Yovel, the one about Torah being protection, etc. But the real motivation is clear that that they don't want to engage in the risk of the army affecting them. And I suspect that also they're not interested in the risk in their lives. Going to the army is risking one's life, as we've seen, unfortunately, too often in this war.
But if it's a Milchama Mitzvah, aren't they in a way obligated to risk their lives?
I would think so. But I have to tell you, and I said at the very beginning, that wasn't the topic I was going to talk about, because although they are related, they're not identical. So, for example, the Tzitz Eliezer, who I brought you, the Tzitz Eliezer clearly holds that the wars of the state of Israel Milchmet Mitzvah for both reasons, according to the Ramban and the Rambam. Tzitz Eliezer does hold that yeshiva boys should be exempt. Now, is his definition any quote-unquote Haredi, or he would have some way of defining what a yeshiva boy is? But the Tzitz Eliezer felt that they should be exempt. Rav Zevin, who I showed you also, thought it was Milchmet Mitzvah, also for both reasons. He also was not clear about the exemption for yeshiva students. So they don't necessarily go hand in hand. It's not a simple issue, but as I said, I think the main reason is the risks involved, the risks to their lifestyle, the risks to their lives, and the risks to their time. I mean, most, thankfully, combat soldiers, while risking their lives, don't give their lives, but they do give of their time. And as Rav Aaron Lichtenstein liked to say, serving in the army is the greatest chesed you'll ever do. You're doing chesed by defending the Jews 24/7 during that time that you're in the army, but you're not doing anything else. Many of these soldiers have lost a year of their life, meaning a year of their parnasa. Their businesses have suffered. They've lost a year of university. They've lost a year, and the Haredim don't want to lose the time. They don't want to risk losing their lives. They don't want to risk losing their lifestyle. And again, when I mentioned that the Tzitz Eliezer said that there should be an exemption, and I mentioned that Rav Zevin maybe felt that, it could be they would feel different today. They were writing 40 years ago and 60 years ago, and it could be the current war is different. In any event, again, I don't want to make it an anti-Haredi bashing. I don't want to make it a Rabbi Berkowitz bashing. I wanted to present how I see the sources. I used Rabbi Berkowitz as a foil, but that's how I see the sources. So if there are any questions.
You did very well in presenting the material. You did very well in presenting the material.
Thank you. So again, if there are any questions or comments on the sources, if any of you have any other way of reading Rav Moshe Feinstein, it's, again, not at all clear. Reading the Rambam's introduction, that business of needing a Beis HaMikdash, not at all clear. I would be very happy to hear if other people have other ways of reading it. Otherwise,
usually the Haredi opinion is that Torah is what protects. That's what I've heard them say.
Yes, that's one of them. Hold on, it's Rabbi Tzvi Reisman is what the person in the chat is asking. Yes, some of them say that the Torah protects, and there are sources like that. There are sources, the Gemaras in Baba Batra, that are quoted the halacha, that people who are full-time learners, that are real Talmidei Chachamim, are protected by their learning, do not have to contribute some of the taxes that go to building the protective wall around the city. I don't know how that would fit with the wall that Trump is about to build, but There are sources that say that Talmidei Chachamim. How you define a Talmid Chacham, I don't know. That is certainly, I can't imagine that the Gemara that talks about Talmidei Chacham not needing protection would apply to every single Haredi male aged 18. But again, I don't want to get into it. That's not. I just again, this whether it's categorized as mitzvah, we have here what seems to me a war. I don't know how else you could define it, and what category does it fit into, and that's what I try to present. So maybe you could talk to Rabbi Kelman, and someone else will present about the Haredi draft exemption. Okay. So in that case, thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
may the war end successfully soon, and all of the our soldiers come home safe and soon.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyway,
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
very much. So
Shabbat shalom.
let's get. Oh, that's my phone. Yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna say have a good Shabbos. Enjoy. Maybe we'll see you one of these days. Would you?